Hi, my name is Deanna Brower, and I am the Executive Director with the American Counseling Association of Missouri. And I'm here now with Robert Cox, who is the owner of the Life Recovery Center, and he is presenting Autism as Trauma workshop in St. Louis coming up Friday, the first Friday of November. And he's here today to talk to us a little bit about this workshop, give you a sneak peek. Thanks, Robert. So can you tell us a little bit about the title of this workshop, Autism as Trauma? What does that mean?
It's based on my book. I want to correct real quick. It's the second weekend in November that we're doing it, November 9th.
Thank you.
Which is that second Friday. I don't want anybody showing up in St. Louis and I'm not there, right? So, but
thank you.
It's based on, the idea that I get this question a lot, that how are trauma and autism related? And the fear is that, gosh, does that mean that the child suffered trauma and that's why they have autism? No, it's quite the opposite. It's what I noticed over 25 years of working with autism in one capacity or another, was that it was shaping, or it seemed to be shaping, the brain in the same way that trauma did. I began to see people who were incredibly reactive and were diving into that limbic region of their brain or even lower very, very quickly. And so I started doing research about 7 years ago. And the research was indicating exactly what I was seeing, that the autism was affecting the development of the brain in the same way that early developmental trauma did. So the workshop itself is based on that research and my work since, and the kind of results that we can get when we stop asking why kids aren't behaving and we start asking why they're afraid. What in the environment is making you afraid? What is making you reactive? What created the trauma that shaped your brain that was rooted in your autism? And how can we begin to manage that so that we move you from the midbrain back up to the prefrontal cortex region where you're making better decisions, right?
That's a very different way of thinking about autism. And if a practitioner isn't fully versed in the autism spectrum disorders, it's probably, for me personally, it can be hard to get a grasp on how to work with clients, how to help families.
I think we're starting to turn the corner, but it's still very much like ABA, behaviorally centered therapies.
Yes, it sure is.
The problem with a lot of these therapies, and this is something we explore in detail in the workshop, is that they're focused on learning new methodologies, learning new ways of behaving based on systems that we set up to encourage new behaviors. Sure. The problem is that's all very left hemisphere, top of the brain stuff. And if I'm in a reactive space, all of that's been turned off by my midbrain.
Sure,
I'm not functioning in that region of my brain. So we have to take the time then to calm the brain so that we turn on that top part. And then we're going to see a lot better results from the ABA therapies and other therapies. I've dealt with parent after parent after parent who was incredibly frustrated. In many cases, I walk in the house and I'm the second or the third therapist to come in, and there's a lot of anger that I'm dealing with, right? And we're just approaching this from a little different perspective. I want to turn off the trauma brain so that I can turn on the upper part of the brain before we start doing any other work with that individual. So
a lot of the things that you're going to cover in this 6-hour CEU event in St. Louis will center around how the autistic brain works. And then what else can you tell us about the presentation?
We're going to cover, people are going to learn how to do a basic sensory assessment that's going to give them a good enough idea if that's what they're dealing with or not. And then they can refer out to an OT specialist for a little more detailed sensory assessment. We're going to talk about the different kinds of sensory issues that can develop, how those become a trauma to the brain, what the research indicates is going on. And then we're going to look at how social development can become a traumatic event when a child is either socially excluded repeatedly or directly bullied because of their difference, because they're not getting what they're not getting. And then we're going to talk about ways of beginning to regulate that trauma brain and how we can move them back up into a more rational place. So really, there's going to be a lot of talk about how we can implement supports in a direction that's going to be in making a real difference for individuals. It's a method that works not only with autism, but also works with IDD individuals, I'm finding out.
Oh,
So
sure. That would make sense. Resources for the clients who have autism and their families, their support structure seems like it would be critical in helping the overall client.
yeah, we're going to talk about state resources because I've worked so long with this
Okay.
state in this area. So we're going to talk about, at least in Missouri, I'm not familiar with, we'll be in St. Louis. I'm not as familiar with Illinois, but perhaps we'll have some people there that can fill us in on that. But in Missouri, I can tell people how to get individuals into state services and how to go about that process so they can start getting some of the supports that they're really going to need, because the therapist is really we are a very strong kind of part of the team, but this needs to be a team effort. And it needs to involve OTs, and when they get older, vocational counseling and all kinds of other things. So I have a copy of your book here, The Life Recovery Method. And from what I understand, a good amount of the material that you're covering in the presentation stems from your research and work that went into creating this book. Yeah, like almost all of the workshop is based on the research that I was doing when I developed the book. But there's a lot of new stuff in there about the right hemisphere and how it plays into especially social and emotional recognition in individuals with autism in those adolescent years. And so it's going to be pretty much everything that's in the book plus more. My recent research has been about how we can use Bruce Perry's model of neurosequential development in order to begin healing the bottom-up, top-down part of the brain. But I've also been doing a lot of work with what I call hemispheric integration, which is back and forth. And so we're going to talk about both of those. And that is not necessarily in the book in that manner. So we're going to add a lot of material.
And from what I understand, this is something that you are going to elaborate more on, perhaps, at the national conference. April 5th through 6th.
At the national conference, I'm probably going to turn to my work with the severe trauma and how we can use those same methods in dealing with severe trauma and even like traumatic brain injury. So what we're really talking about is the traumatized brain, no matter what created that, whether it was intellectual disability or brain injury or severe abuse or neglect. We're dealing with a brain that is traumatized. And so it's functioning in that mid-region or below in what Perry referred to as the diencephalon, right? So we're going to talk a lot about that at the conference.
And a quick correction, again, I said national conference, but that's the statewide conference that will be in Independence, Missouri, just outside of Kansas City in April. So thank you so much, Robert, for taking the time to talk about this presentation.
Thanks for inviting me. I hope to see everybody in St. Louis.
Absolutely. And if you're looking for more information about this workshop or to hear Robert speak at the state conference in April, please check out our website, counselingmissouri.org. All right. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Look forward to seeing you in St. Louis.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.